Good morning. It's time to start class this morning. This morning we're going through 2 Samuel 17 and 18. So it's so we'll probably move through it pretty fast because there's quite a bit of verses in there. So up to here we have Absalom kind of turning against David here. David's feeling the repercussions of his choices with Bathsheba on here. And so this is really, these two chapters are in my mind, just kind of a sad set of chapters on there, because you have David and his children. There's his son. He's had a lot, already having his sons killed, and now he has another son who is a favorite of the people turning against him. And I can only imagine what it's like to have a child that you raise kind of turn against you and struggle with that, and you try to think, where did I go wrong in parenting and so forth. And so it's a relatively a sad and concerning chapter. And then on the way here this morning, I was coming in, I was listening to a new song, and it was really sad, and I must have had the window cracked. So I think some dirt got in my eye and started tearing up. So it's been a rough couple of days. So anyway, so we'll start at 17 and go verses 1 through 4 here. Moreover, Ahithophel, how do we say that? Ahithophel? Okay. When you read that and study it, you never pronounce it out loud. Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Now let me choose 12,000 men, and I will rise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and weak, and make him afraid. And all the people who are with him will flee. And I will strike only the king. Then I will bring back all the people to you. When all return except the man whom you seek, all the people will be at peace." And the saying pleased Absalom and all of the elders of Israel. Okay, so Absalom's a son plotting against his father. They know David's in a weakened state here, and he says, "Let me take men over there, and I will go and I will kill." And I don't know if there's a slip of the tongue where he said the king, because Absalom's claiming he's king, right? And his general says, "Well, I will kill the king, and we will end this. We won't have a large war between David and Israel on there." And Absalom, and it was a good idea, and Absalom agreed that it was a good idea. But then in verse 5, Absalom said, "Now call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he has to say." And then Hushai came to Absalom, and Absalom spoke to him, saying, "Ahithophel has spoken in this manner. Shall we do as he says? If not, speak up." So Hushai said to Absalom, "The advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. For," said Hushai, "you know your father and his men, that they are mighty men, and that they are enraged in their minds, like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. And your father is a man of war, and will not camp with the people. Surely by now he is hidden in some pit or in some other place. And it will be, when some of them are overthrown at the first, that whoever hears it will say, 'There is a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom.' And even he who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt completely. For all Israel know that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men." So Hushai is on the side of David. So he hears his plan. David's here, and he hears his plan of them going and taking David. So he tries to talk them out of it. So he knows David is in a weakened state here. He was just kind of chewed out by the prophet. And this is a good plan for them to capture David. And he knows that most likely he succeed. So he talks him out of it. He tries to refer back to the David that David was. Because everyone remembers David as this warrior who conquered Israel, conquered Philistines. And he's trying to have them remember that David, really not the David that's here right now. And he tells them that they shouldn't do this. And so he continues, he says, "Therefore I advise that all Israel be fully gathered to you from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand that is by the sea from the multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we will come upon him in some place where he may be found, and we will fall on him as the dew falls on the ground. And of him and all the men who are with him there shall not be left so much as one. Moreover, if he has withdrawn into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city, and we will pull it down to the river, and there is no small stone found there. So he says, instead of attacking them now, because he says he's crafty and he's already gone, he's forming an army, we should go and gather all the army together, and then you should go battle in person on there, so that you can lead this army. So he's playing to the vanity of Absalom here, because Absalom is very vain here, as we will find out. And he's telling, and so what he's doing, he's giving David time to escape and to gather, and really playing into David's hands, because David and his generals are very strategic and they're veterans of battle. Where you have Absalom is more of is new to this. And so he's playing to his vanity. So Absalom and all the men individuals said, the advice of Hushai, the Archite, is better than the advice of Ahithophel. The Lord had purposed to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel, to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster to Absalom. So Absalom, so you have Ahithophel says, he's there, he's vulnerable, let's take guys, let's just capture him, there's not a big war. And then Hushai says, oh, no, he's already escaped, and he's gathered an army, we should wait, gather all your army together, you go out there in person, and you show how much of a leader you are, and you overtake him. And so he goes with that advice. And in verse 15, then Hushai said to Zadok the Abiathar, the priest, thus and so Ahithophel advised Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so I have advised. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, do not spend the night in the plains of the wilderness, but speedily cross over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. So then Hushai sends a message to David saying that they're looking for you, get out of town. Don't spend the night here, but go. In verse 17, now Jonathan and Ahimaaz stayed at El Rogel, for they dared not be seen coming into the city. So a female servant would come and tell him, and they would go and tell King David. Nevertheless, a lad saw them and told Absalom. But both of them went away quickly and came to a man's house in Bahurim, who had a well in his court, and they went down into it. Then the woman took and spread a cover over the well's mouth, and spread ground grain on it, and the thing was not known. And when Absalom's servants came to the woman in the house, they said, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? So the woman said to them, they have gone over the water brook. And when they had searched and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. Now it came to pass after they had departed that they came up out of the well and went and took David and said to David, arise and cross over the water quickly, for thus has Ahithophel advised against you. So David and all the people who were with him arose and crossed over the Jordan by morning light, and not one of them was left who had gone over to the Jordan. So you have the whole nation here that's kind of turning against David in this area. So they have him hide in a well, and then they go and they leave and they cross the Jordan. And so I thought this here was interesting in verse 17. Now when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey and rose and went home to his house, to his city. Then he put his household in order and hung himself and died, and he was buried in his father's tomb. So Ahithophel gives them the advice to go take him now. They don't listen to him. Place of the king's vanity. So he goes home and hangs himself. What explanation do you guys have of that?
Well, I think there's a lot going on there. It says in the end of chapter 16, the counsel of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, is it was as if a man inquired at the oracle of God.
Mm-hmm.
His counsel was accurate.
Right.
So there, I think, some pride there, but also, I think there's a family dynamic, because Ahithophel is Bathsheba's grandpa.
Right.
So there's a lot of things there. The pride, the fact that his counsel wasn't followed. If you study out there, though, he is directly related to Bathsheba. There could be some of that in there also.
Right. And it's interesting because obviously your pride is going to play into this. But what got me here is, was there any other?
Okay. Yeah, he was such a good counselor. He had the insight to see what was likely to happen.
And I think that's it, because when he comes in here, he goes home and this wasn't an impulsive hanging. He goes home and he puts everything in order. And so this is a planned hanging, I guess. He goes there, but he goes and he puts everything in his house in order on there. And I think, and this is my personal opinion, his advice was not followed. He sees there was victory in his plan to take it. He sees the king, or Absalom, playing into his vanity, and he knows if he gets an army and he goes against David in a full army, he's not going to win. Right? He sees that David will win this. He had an opportunity to take it, and for Absalom to be king. Absalom did not take it. He played to his vanity. He knows it's over on there. And so he puts everything in order and knows it's the end and just ends it on there. Because I was thinking if it was more of, he's mad at fall of ice, he'd just go out and hang himself. But this was a very planned, calculated, puts everything in order, and everything in order where things in this world are taken care of, tells him where he wants to be buried, and then he hangs himself. Then David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the army instead of Joab. The Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Jethro, an Israelite, who had gone to Abigail, the daughter of Naashah, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. So Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. Okay, so he makes so Amasa was the son of a niece of David and a cousin of Joab. So he makes him the captain of the army instead of Joab. And Joab most likely has more experience. So in verse 27, now it happened when David had come to Mahanaim, that Shobi, the son of Nahash from Rabbah, and the people of Ammon, Machir, the son of Amiel from Lodabar, and Barzai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds and basins, earthen vessels and wheat, barley and flour, parched grain and beans, lentils and parched seed, honey and curds, sheep and cheese of the herd, for David and the people who were with them to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So you have otherwise, these obscure men giving special mention because they helped David in a time of need on there. So still showing that God is kind of with David here and still helping him through this. Even though David has made bad choices, he's paying for those bad choices. God is still with him and he's still helping him. Okay, so that takes us to chapter 18. So do you have any questions or comments on 17? Went through it kind of fast, but just the synopsis there is planning to get David. Absalom picks to do it in a big war, gives David time to escape. And so in chapter 18 here, we'll have the war. So verse 1-4, and David numbered the people who were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Then David set out 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of the Tai, the Gileadite. And the king said to the people, I also will surely go out with you myself. But the people answered, "You shall not go out, for if we flee away, they will not care about us, nor if half of us die, they care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us now, for you are now more help to us in the city. Then the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands." So here you see a difference between Absalom and David. David's telling him, "I'm going to go out to war with you." And the people tell him, "No, don't go out." And there's a few reasons. In their eyes, David's life is more valuable than theirs. You are worth 10,000 of us. And if they start losing, if David's out of the war, he can bring reserves in. And I think they also understood that it would be very hard for David to fight against his own son in this war. And I think they realized that. And so they're just telling him to stay back. And then you see David here not playing to his vanity, but listening to his people, and then choosing not to go into the war. Because David's been in a lot of wars. And he says, whatever seems best to you, I will do. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, "Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom." And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. So he tells the leaders pretty much to, what does he say? Deal gently. So he wants Absalom to come back alive. And he not only tells the generals in private, he tells them in public, so that all the people following him understand that this is David's will. He does not want to hurt Absalom. And this could be one of the reasons they didn't want him to come. So the people went out into the field of battle against Israel. And the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. The people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David, and a great slaughter of 20,000 took place there that day. For the battle there was scattered over the face of the whole countryside. And the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. So they went to the field of battle against Israel. So here's the battle where you have David and his experienced soldiers, experienced leader against his son. And with God's help, they slaughtered him. And then it says here that the battle is in the woods of Ephraim, and that the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. So I don't know if as they were being slaughtered, they ran into the woods, and then there's cliffs in there, or they got tangled in the woods, and the guys killed them. But you can see that God's providence was in here. So then Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode on a mule. And that was and I don't know if anyone's ever rode a mule before, but especially in the battle, this kind of shows the experience of Absalom in war on there. Mules are kind of hard to control. They're not very fast, they're not very agile, but Absalom goes on a mule, and the mule went under a thick burrow of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth. So he was left hanging between heaven and earth. So he's riding this mule, which are hard to control. And I mean, mules are terrible. So he rides on the mule, and he gets his head and hair. Probably because he can't control the mule very well. He just caught in this tree. And remember, he's got long hair. I think a couple chapters back, it talked about how he was one of the best looking in the land, and he had long flowing hair and so forth. And so he gets caught with his hair, which almost is symbolizing his vanity, gets caught in this tree. So Joab said to the man who told him, "You just saw him, and why did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt." So shekels of silver are worth quite a bit, but the belt was when someone got promoted in the army, they got a belt on there, and a belt was very sought after, and it was very honorable for a higher ranking officer to give someone else a belt, and that was a promotion. Yes, sir.
Talking about mules are very intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
While they are hard to control, they're always looking after their own safety.
Mhm.
If you try to take them into some place that's not good for them, they won't go.
Right.
So perhaps the reason they went under the tree is maybe that other ways. So I can go under the tree, that's why I'm couldn't.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's just in Texas. I mean, you have all the things like hard-headed as a mule, and you call someone a mule when they're hard-headed on there, and that's how they are. Yeah, they're. I don't know why you'd ever pick a mule over a horse. I just can't fathom. But all right, so we have him. He said, "Would give me the belt." But the man said to Joab, "Though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, 'Beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise, I would have dealt falsely against my own life. But there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me.' Then Joab says, 'I cannot linger with you.' And he took 3 spears in his hand, and thrust them through Absalom's heart. And he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree, and 10 young men who bore Joab's army surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. So Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, where Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom and cast him into a large pit in the woods, and laid a very large heap of stones over him. Then all Israel fled, everyone to his own tent. So young men finds Absalom hanging in the trees. And a lot of commentaries, it was talking about how he was hanging there, he's going to get himself out, but there was obstacles underneath, but that's just kind of historic. It's not in the Bible. But anyway, he's on the tree and he can't get down on there. And so a man sees him. He chooses not to harm him. And then Joab finds out, he goes there and he puts spears in him. And so he does this against the direct order of David. We don't know why he did it, but I assumed he understands that this is best for David and Israel, is to end Absalom's life on there. So they end it. So then the body, they just bury under stones. They don't want this taken back to Israel and him become a martyr on there. Because I think in earlier chapters, he talked about, or maybe it's later, not having a son. So he's built a statue to himself. So they don't want him to be a martyr. They just bury him there with the stones. And then once it happened, all of Israel fled, everyone to his own tent. So Absalom's army was in full retreat, and David's forces completely carried the day. And here it is. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is in the king's valley, for he said, "I have no sons to keep my name in remembrance." He called the pillar after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. Well, in 2 Samuel 14, he did have 3 sons. So I didn't know at this time if those sons had died or what, but he didn't have anyone to carry on his legacy. So he builds a pillar for himself. And this is something we could kind of expect from someone that's vain on there, is that he has a self-promotion that he wants to be important and wants people to remember him. Verse 19, then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, "Let me run now and take the news to the king, how the Lord has avenged him of his enemies." And Joab said, "You shall not take the news this day, for you shall take the news another day. But today you shall take no news, because the king's son is dead." Then Joab said to the Cushite, "Go, tell the king what you have seen." So the Cushite bowed himself to Joab and ran. And Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said again to Joab, "But whatever happens, please let me also run after the Cushite." So Joab said, "Why will you run, my son, since you have no news ready? But whatever happens," he says, "let me run." So he said to him, "Run." And so Ahimaaz wants to go tell the news. Joab doesn't want him to, because it's bad news. He doesn't know what will happen. And so he sends another servant, but Ahimaaz ends up going anyway. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain, and outran the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate to the wall, lifted his eyes, looked, and there was a man running alone. So David's standing at the two gates. So he's waiting for news to see what happened. And so this, as he's waiting for the messenger to come, messenger can say we're losing, we need reinforcements, or he can say we won, or he's just waiting for any type of news. Then the watchman cried out and told the king, and the king said, if he is alone, there is news in his mouth. That means you don't have an army retreating. If he's alone, he has news. And he came rapidly and drew near. Then the watchman saw another running, and the watchman called to the gatekeeper and said, there is another man running alone. And the king said, he also brings news. So the watchman said, I think the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. And the king says, he is a good man and comes with good news. So Ahimaaz must have been faster than this other servant, because he gets there first. And Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, all is well. Then he bowed down with his face to the earth before the king and said, blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king. And the king said, is a young man Absalom safe? And so you can see where David's mind is here, just on his son. He doesn't ask, how many people did we lose in the war? He doesn't, he's only concerned really is about his son. And then Ahimaaz answered, when Joab sent the king's servant and me, your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I did not know what it was about. And the king says, turn aside and stand here. So he turned aside and stood here. Just then Cushite came, and the Cushite said, there is good news, my lord the king, for the Lord has avenged you this day of all those who rose against you. And the king said to the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? So the Cushite answered, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise against you to do harm be like that young man. So he's pretty much saying that your son is dead. And so you have the Cushite that goes and answers and tells him that he's dead. And you see David's concern here only about his son. And there's probably a couple reasons that we see now that they did not want David to be in the war. He could affect the war if they were winning and he sees his son in danger. He could have pulled back the army on there. You see probably why they killed his son. If they would have let him live, he would have still had a great influence on David. So you see these actions of these men protecting David, even going against his will on there. It shows to you how a great leader David is. And then how much, you could tell a great leader by how much that the people under him really care about him and really, even against himself. They're willing to disobey him just to have the best outcome for him. So you see David being a great leader on here. And even when he makes decisions that are questionable, the others will still do everything they can to protect him. So then the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he wept, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. So you have mourning here from David, who's wishing that he would have died instead of his son. So that was relatively fast through there. But you see, you just see a tragedy here of a son turning away, people protecting their king David, and then God being with David and giving him victory over the army. So any thoughts? Any final thoughts from you guys?
Well, Joab's an interesting character. I know he's not loyal to David. He disobeys David multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
In 17, verse 25 says that Absalom had set Amasa over the army instead of Joab. And so we don't know if Joab just stayed with David the whole time or if Absalom replaced him and then he goes to David.
Right.
But that could be part of the reason too. Absalom kicked him out. He has
a little personal vendetta against him. That could be motivation there as well. Yeah, it's a because with your kids, you always try to raise your kids, and obviously Dave's going to question himself. You're going to raise your kids the best of your abilities on there. And then there's times your kids are going to go astray, and that's just life. There's times that we went astray with our parents, and we did things that our parents wouldn't approve of, and you hope that you raise them with enough compass and guidance that they kind of overcome that and they stay on the path on there. Then obviously here Absalom kind of turned against David, so that's going to be real hard on a parent there. And so this is just how it really shows how important it is to really spend time with your kids. In my mind, spend time with your kids. Be sure you raise them with morals. And then that's not going to, and obviously, you can raise them in church, love God. They still have free will. They will still make decisions that you don't approve of. But you hope that you give them enough guidance and enough information and enough support that they'll correct themselves and make those good choices on there. And this kind of shows how disaster can happen if you don't on there. So that's kind of my takeaway from these chapters. Anyone else has anything to add? All right. Well, thank you. We'll do 19 next week.